When Daniel stopped at the staircase that night, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. For the first time in years, both of his sons were sitting quietly at the dinner table, hands together, praying beside the new housekeeper. And in that exact moment, the millionaire realized the woman who had entered his house only 3 weeks earlier had already done what nobody else had been able to do in 3 years. Before we begin, subscribe and leave a like if you enjoy emotional stories about family, healing, and second chances. New stories are uploaded every day, and don't forget to comment what city you're listening from. Emily Carter arrived at the mansion on a Monday morning carrying a small shoulder bag, a folded cleaning uniform inside it, and the kind of posture that made it clear she did not need anyone's approval to walk into her room. Daniel Hayes opened the front door, expecting exactly what he always expected lately, another woman who would last 2 weeks at most before quitting. Like all the others, instead he found a 26-year-old woman with steady eyes and a calm but direct voice who looked at him without hesitation and said, "I know how to work, and I know how to deal with children. Give me one chance and I'll prove it." Daniel led her inside. Not because he believed her, mostly because he was too exhausted to argue anymore. But there was also something unusual in her voice. It did not beg, it stated. And Daniel was not used to hearing that from people who depended on him for employment. He was 42 years old, owner of 2 companies, living inside one of the most expensive gated communities in the city, with a schedule so overloaded that entire weeks disappeared before he noticed them. And inside that massive 3-story mansion lived his 2 sons, Noah and Liam, both 10 years old, who had turned the house into emotional warfare ever since their mother disappeared 3 years earlier without explanation. Sophia had left one ordinary evening. No note, no goodbye, no phone call afterward. When Daniel woke up the next morning, she was simply gone. And the boys had grown up since then, surrounded by a revolving door of housekeepers and nannies who never survived more than a month. The children threw food onto the floor, hid employees' belongings, answered every adult with hostility, and laughed whenever another exhausted woman finally walked out the service entrance unable to tolerate them anymore. Daniel saw all of it, but he no longer knew how to reach them. Every attempt at conversation ended with emotional walls. Every attempt at discipline turned into another disaster. Eventually, he stopped trying to fix things and simply paid salaries until the next resignation arrived. Emily walked upstairs on her first day without asking anyone to guide her. She found the boys inside Noah's bedroom, surrounded by a level of chaos that completely covered the floor. Both children looked at her with the same expression they always used when preparing to drive someone away. Emily stepped into the room, examined the mess quietly, then looked at both boys. "All right," she said calmly. "First you tell me your names." Noah frowned suspiciously before answering. Liam stayed silent. Emily glanced toward him gently. "That's all right too," she said. "Whenever you want to tell me, I'm here." Then she simply started organizing the room. No complaints, no lectures, no dramatic reaction to the disaster surrounding her. And the boys kept staring at her, waiting for the moment her attitude would change. But it never did. 15 minutes later, Emily walked downstairs with both boys silently following behind her. Daniel was standing in the living room when she spoke. "Lunch will be ready in 40 minutes. Will you be eating here today?" Daniel looked at his sons. Noah's shirt was tucked in. Liam's hair was brushed. Both boys stood quietly beside her as though that behavior had always been natural for them. For one entire moment, Daniel could not answer, because he genuinely did not understand what he was seeing. Finally, he muttered something about eating upstairs in his office and walked away faster than necessary because there was something unsettling about the scene downstairs, something he was not prepared to examine yet. Over the following days, the house slowly began changing in ways Daniel absolutely noticed while pretending to himself that he did not, because noticing meant accepting he was being emotionally affected by it, and he was not ready for that. The kitchen was always clean in the mornings. The dining table was always prepared at the correct time. The boys went to school without screaming, fighting, or endless negotiations. Emily never yelled, never threatened, never interrupted Daniel's workday with complaints, never asked for praise. She simply handled everything, and there was something different about the efficiency she carried. It went beyond competence. It felt deeper, like she instinctively understood what a place needed and quietly provided it without demanding recognition afterward. Whenever the boys attempted one of their usual manipulative games, Emily would look at them with calm firmness and say softly, "That won't work with me. But if you want to tell me what's really going on, I'm listening." They rarely answered, but they stopped. And stopping alone was already different from anything that had happened before. Late Thursday night during her first week, Daniel came downstairs for water and found Emily sitting alone at the kitchen table with a notebook open beside her. When he entered, she looked up naturally, without embarrassment, like someone who felt she had the right to exist comfortably in the room she occupied. Daniel grabbed water from the refrigerator, but paused briefly after noticing the notebook. Before he could ask, Emily explained. It's a recipe list. Daniel looked toward her. Noah told me his favorite meal is chicken stew with okra. She continued. I'm researching the right way to make it. Daniel stood still for a second. None of the previous employees had ever asked the boys about favorite foods, and somehow he himself did not know his own son's favorite meal after 10 years of being his father. He quietly wished her good night and left the kitchen faster than necessary. That night he lay awake staring at the ceiling far longer than he could logically explain. Friday evening he arrived home after 10 o'clock. The mansion was silent and organized. Inside the refrigerator sat a covered dinner plate with a handwritten note underneath it. In careful handwriting, the note read, If you haven't eaten yet, dinner is in the oven on low heat so it won't get cold. Daniel stared at the note for far too long, considering how simple it was. Then he warmed the food and sat alone at the enormous dining table. The meal tasted like something he had not felt inside that house for years. Something warm, something human. And after finishing, he remained seated in silence, staring at the empty chair across from him before finally standing again. Saturday morning, Daniel walked downstairs and stopped halfway on the staircase. Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor playing cards with both boys, and Liam was laughing. Not politely, not cautiously, really laughing. Daniel froze because it had been so long since he heard that specific sound from his son that for 1 second he almost failed to recognize it. Emily looked up briefly, noticed him standing there, then returned to the game naturally without commenting. She's beating both of us, Noah complained dramatically. That's because you keep watching each other instead of the cards, Emily answered without looking up. Liam laughed again while hiding cards from his brother, and suddenly the room became noisy in a completely different way than before. Not destructive noise, happy noise, the kind created by people feeling safe together. Daniel finished. Descending the staircase slowly, made coffee in the kitchen, and spent much longer standing beside the machine than necessary before returning upstairs. That morning, he worked less than he had worked on any Saturday in the previous 3 years. During the second week, Daniel began arriving home 30 or 40 minutes earlier than usual. He kept telling himself it was because of traffic, and he knew perfectly well he was lying to himself. But the lie felt easier than admitting the real reason. Tuesday evening, he arrived and found the living room door closed. Before opening it, he heard Emily's voice from inside. She was reading aloud, not mechanically. Her voice changed gently with each character, each emotion, each scene in the story. And the boys were completely silent, listening to her. Daniel stood outside with one hand on the doorknob for 4 full minutes without entering, just listening. Then he quietly walked away toward his office without making noise, carrying an uncomfortable feeling in his chest that he was trying very hard not to inspect too closely. Wednesday of that same week, Daniel returned from a 6-hour business meeting with a headache buried behind his eyes. He went straight upstairs, swallowed medicine, closed the office blinds, and laid down on the couch with one arm covering his face. 20 minutes later, someone knocked softly on the door. Come in, he muttered, assuming it was one of the boys. Instead, Emily entered carrying a mug filled with steaming water, ginger, and lemon. She placed it carefully on the small table beside the couch. For headaches, she said quietly. It works better than medication sometimes. Daniel looked at the mug. How did you know I had a headache? Emily answered naturally. You came home without greeting anyone, went directly upstairs and didn't turn on the office lights. People with headaches avoid bright light. Then she quietly left again, closing the door gently behind her. Daniel drank the tea. 40 minutes later, the headache was gone, and he found himself staring at the empty mug far longer than was reasonable. He already knew he was in trouble emotionally, but doing something about it would mean confronting decisions he still was not prepared to make. Friday evening of the second week, Daniel was inside his office during a phone call when he heard a different sound downstairs. Not chaos, crying. He ended the call immediately and went downstairs. Liam sat on the bottom stair of the staircase, with his face buried against his knees, crying quietly like someone trying hard not to make noise. Emily sat beside him on the same step with one hand resting gently against the boy's back. She was not talking, just staying there with him. Daniel froze halfway down the stairs. Emily looked up at him and gave the smallest nod, a silent reassurance. It's okay. You can come closer. Daniel descended slowly and sat on Liam's other side. Then he placed one hand carefully on his son's shoulder, and together, the three of them stayed silent. Several minutes later, Liam finally lifted his red face and spoke with a shaking voice. My teacher asked us to draw our families today. Daniel stayed still, and I didn't know what to draw. The words reached somewhere deep inside Daniel that had remained locked for 3 years. He stared at his son, unable to answer. Emily spoke first instead. And what did you draw in the end? Liam wiped his face. Me, Noah, and Dad. Then he hesitated briefly. But it still felt like there was empty space on the paper. Daniel pulled his son closer immediately and wrapped one arm around him without speaking. Emily quietly stood and walked toward the kitchen, leaving the two of them alone. That night, Daniel stayed awake for hours staring at the ceiling while thoughts he had buried too deeply for too long slowly rose to the surface without permission. By the third week, the house carried a rhythm that felt strangely permanent, and at the same time, Daniel knew with complete clarity that life had never looked like this before. He also realized something else. He was thinking about Emily constantly even when she was not physically present, and that had become impossible to ignore. He would sit through business lunches while remembering handwritten notes left beside dinner plates, drive through traffic while hearing her voice reading stories in his memory, attend important meetings and suddenly realize he had stopped listening 3 minutes earlier because he was replaying the image of Emily quietly comforting Liam on the staircase. Daniel understood perfectly there was a line that should not be crossed. His awareness of that fact was absolute, but awareness and emotion were no longer existing in the same place inside him, and they were not communicating very well anymore. Wednesday evening of the third week, Daniel arrived home unusually early. The backyard was quiet. He stepped outside and found Emily sitting in a chair holding a gardening book, while the boys knelt beside a wooden planter box with dirt covering their hands. Dad, Noah called excitedly, we're planting tomatoes. Emily looked toward Daniel calmly. In about 3 months, they'll be ready. Daniel held her gaze for 1 second too long before quickly looking away. I'm going upstairs to change. He retreated inside before the moment became something he no longer knew how to manage. But that night, for the first time in years, all four of them ate dinner together because the boys had asked him to, and Daniel could not bring himself to say no. The conversation revolved around tomatoes, watering schedules, and whether plants grew faster in sunlight or shade. Daniel sat watching his sons speak animatedly, and eventually realized he had been smiling for several minutes without noticing when it began. Emily sat quietly at the far end of the table. At one point, Daniel looked toward her and found her watching the boys with an expression so honest and warm that it physically hurt him for reasons he could not explain. Thank you, he said suddenly. Emily turned toward him. For dinner, he added quickly because he needed a concrete excuse. She nodded once. Noah seasoned the chicken tonight. Noah immediately turned red with pride. And Liam helped with the salad, Emily added. The conversation continued naturally, but the real thank you remained trapped inside Daniel's chest because the words he actually meant still felt too dangerous to say aloud. At the end of the third week, Daniel received a phone call from an unknown number on Saturday afternoon. He answered absent-mindedly, then froze the second he heard her name, Sophia. His ex-wife's voice sounded tense and controlled as she explained she needed to discuss the boys. What she said next entered slowly, painfully. By the time the call ended, Daniel's hands were trembling slightly. Sophia had hired an attorney. She was filing for custody, and according to her legal petition, Daniel's home environment was emotionally unstable and unsuitable for the children. The court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Daniel sat alone inside the dark office without turning on the lights for a very long time. Downstairs, Emily's voice occasionally drifted upward together with the sound of the boys laughing. Contrast nearly crushed him. Eventually, he walked downstairs. The moment Emily saw his face, she understood immediately something was wrong. But she did not ask questions in front of the boys. She waited until they went upstairs, cleaned the kitchen quietly, and only then approached the living room, where Daniel sat on the couch with both hands clasped tightly in front of his face. Are you all right? She asked softly. Daniel remained silent for several seconds, then finally answered, The boy's mother wants custody. Emily stopped moving completely while he continued speaking. She disappeared for 3 years without one word, and now she's taking me to court saying this house isn't good for them. His voice remained controlled, but underneath it, something was beginning to break. Emily sat beside him at a respectful distance. This house changed a lot in the last 3 weeks, she said quietly. Daniel turned toward her. The boys are happy now, stable. Anyone who walks inside this house can see that. There was no arrogance in her voice, only conviction. And that conviction arrived exactly when Daniel desperately needed something solid to hold on to. He looked at her longer than a professional conversation allowed. And he was the one who looked away first. "Thank you," he said quietly. This time he did not attach any practical excuse afterward. Emily wished him good night softly and went upstairs. Daniel remained on the couch another hour, but the fear felt lighter now, and he knew exactly where that difference came from. That realization frightened him almost as much as it comforted him. The following week, Daniel's attorney called confirming everything officially. Sophia had filed the petition. The court date was finalized. And from that moment forward, the atmosphere inside the mansion shifted into something quieter and heavier. Daniel became more distant without meaning to. The boys noticed. Emily noticed too. Thursday afternoon, Noah entered Daniel's office carrying a folded drawing. Without speaking, he placed it on the desk. Daniel opened the paper slowly. There were 3 larger figures drawn at the center. Himself, Noah, Liam, and in one corner there was a 4th smaller figure wearing a black uniform with a white apron, drawn with less detail, but positioned carefully beside them. Noah stood quietly before speaking. "I redid the family drawing at home," he said. This time the paper had enough space. Then he walked away, leaving the drawing behind. Daniel remained seated, staring at it while something shifted painfully inside his chest. And in that exact moment, he finally stopped, pretending what he felt for Emily was only gratitude, or admiration, or respect. It had already become something real, something dangerous, something growing quietly inside him for a woman who had entered his house carrying only a small bag and a folded uniform and somehow rebuilt the emotional foundation of the entire family without asking for anything in return. He still did not know what he intended to do about it, but he knew silence was becoming impossible. Daniel stayed inside the office for a long time after realizing Emily could no longer be treated in his mind as just another employee temporarily fixing household chaos. The silence inside the room felt different that night, because for once, he was not analyzing business losses or searching for financial solutions. He was facing his own life, and the way it had changed without permission. Eventually, he placed Noah's drawing carefully inside his desk drawer, closed it slowly, and walked downstairs without fully knowing what he planned to say, only that he could no longer continue pretending nothing was happening. Emily stood in the kitchen, drying the final dinner plates. Her hair remained tied back, the apron still wrapped neatly around her waist. Everything about her movements carried the same calm precision as always, as though even if the entire world collapsed around her, she would still somehow keep every piece organized. When she noticed Daniel entering, she did not ask questions immediately. She simply observed his expression and understood the conversation mattered. "Do you need something to eat?" she asked first, because care always seemed to begin with practical things for her. Daniel shook his head slowly. "I need to talk." Emily placed the towel carefully on the counter and waited, and Daniel told her everything about Sophia's call, the legal petition, the hearing, the fear of losing his sons after everything that had happened during the last several years. He did not exaggerate, did not present himself as a victim. He simply spoke like an exhausted man finally admitting aloud what he had been carrying alone for far too long. When he finished, silence settled between them briefly. Emily looked at him for several seconds before finally answering. "Now it makes sense." Daniel frowned slightly. "What does?" "The way you've been looking at the boys lately," she explained quietly. "Like you're trying to memorize every moment with them." Daniel looked away for 1 second. "I'm scared, Emily." She nodded without dramatics. "I know." Daniel exhaled slowly. "It's been a long time since I admitted that to anyone." "Then maybe it was time to stop carrying everything by yourself." The sentence was simple, but it hit him harder than expected. Daniel lifted his eyes toward her again. "She's going to say I was absent," he admitted quietly. "And honestly, for a long time she'll be partially right." Emily remained listening carefully. "She'll say this house wasn't a good place for them, and for years she would have been right about that too. But it isn't like that anymore," Emily answered firmly. Daniel stared at her. "No," she continued softly. "Now we show them the truth." Daniel nearly repeated the word "we," because it was the first time someone spoke to him like part of the solution instead of a distant observer. "We don't back away now," Emily said calmly. "As long as I'm here, I'm not going to act like this has nothing to do with me. Those boys trust me now. I'm not going to stand by and watch everything fall apart." Daniel watched her so intensely that another sentence might have changed the entire atmosphere inside the kitchen, but Emily moved first. "Tomorrow you call your attorney again," she said. "And tomorrow we talk honestly with the boys. They already know something is wrong." Daniel nodded slowly because deep down He knew she was right. Before leaving the kitchen, he stopped near the doorway. Aren't you afraid of getting involved in this? Emily thought, for less than a second. When you choose to truly care about someone, she answered softly, there's no such thing as standing outside anymore. Daniel went upstairs with those words, repeating endlessly in his mind. He slept very little that night, but for the first time in years he slept, knowing he was not alone. The following morning, Daniel woke earlier than everyone else for the first time in months. Emily was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast while the first sunlight entered. Through the windows, giving the room a peaceful warmth Daniel still was not fully accustomed to thinking of as part of his own life. Without asking questions, Emily placed a mug of coffee in front of him. Only afterward did she ask, are you calling the attorney early? Daniel wrapped both hands around the mug. He'll be here at 9. Emily nodded and continued slicing fruit. There was no exaggerated anxiety in her behavior, and somehow that steadiness comforted him more than sympathy ever. Good. Several minutes later, the boys came downstairs. Noah first, like always, pretending to be tougher than he actually felt. Liam followed more slowly, already sensing something was different. Daniel asked both boys to sit down. Noah looked between the adults immediately. Did something happen? Daniel pulled out a chair and sat at eye level with them. He decided not to waste time hiding reality behind unnecessary preparation. Your mother filed paperwork asking the court for more custody. Time with both of you, he explained carefully. There's going to be a hearing. People from the court will talk to everyone to understand what's best. Noah immediately stiffened. Liam blinked twice before asking quietly, is she coming back to live here? Daniel answered gently. No, nothing like that is happening right now. But I don't want to lie to you. This is probably going to be difficult for a while. Noah leaned both elbows onto the table. She suddenly remembered she's our mom now. Sentence sounded harsh, but beneath it was pain, not disrespect. Daniel did not avoid the question. I don't know what's happening inside her head, he admitted honestly. I only know what I'm going to do. Both boys looked at him. I'm going to fight for you. Liam turned instinctively toward Emily, like someone searching for the stable part of the answer. What if everything changes? Emily leaned slightly closer and answered in the calm voice she always used when trying to make him feel as safe. You're not going through this alone. One step at a time. Noah tightened his jaw. I don't want to go with her. Daniel immediately understood how difficult that sentence had been for his son to say aloud. Then when people ask, Daniel answered quietly, you tell the truth. Noah looked directly at him. And what if nobody believes us? Daniel responded without hesitation because he knew uncertainty could not exist there. I'm going to do everything possible to make sure they do. Breakfast continued more quietly afterward, but the silence felt healthier than uncertainty without explanation. Once the boys left for school, Daniel's attorney arrived. His name was Marcus Reed, a calm, discreet man accustomed to managing emotional tension without wasting words. Inside the office, Marcus opened several folders and went directly to the point. Sophia's argument is going to focus heavily on your previous routine, he explained. She'll claim the boys were emotionally raised by employees while you compensated absence with money and structure. Daniel rubbed one hand over his face slowly. For a long time? That was true. Marcus nodded once. But it isn't true anymore. And that matters. The judge won't analyze only the past. They'll analyze present stability. Daniel looked toward the office window thoughtfully. The present stability has a name. Marcus understood immediately. Emily? Daniel nodded. She changed this entire house. The attorney leaned back slightly. Then she becomes important. Not as a temporary employee, as someone who restored routine, emotional structure, and trust for the boys. That carries weight. Daniel remained silent for several seconds before Marcus continued. But there's one thing you need to do personally. What? You need visible presence now. School pickups, homework, meals, appointments, real participation. Not performance for court, consistency. Because if everything still depends entirely on her, opposing counsel could argue the household functions through emotional outsourcing. The sentence made immediate sense. Daniel stood from the chair slowly. Then that's exactly what I'm going to change. From that day forward, the mansion changed again. Not dramatically, but through small adjustments that slowly became meaningful. Daniel reorganized meetings so he could spend more time inside the boys' real routines. He canceled 2 business dinners in the same week, replaced several in-person meetings with video, calls, picked the boys up from school twice personally, and began sitting down for dinner almost every evening he could manage. At first, even the boys seemed unsure how to react. Noah observed his father cautiously. like someone waiting for the old distance to suddenly return. Liam looked happier, but careful, as if trusting too quickly still felt dangerous. Emily followed the transition quietly, correcting small mistakes without humiliating Daniel, reminding him about school materials, warning him when one of the boys seemed emotionally fragile, helping without making him feel incapable. Thursday afternoon, Daniel arrived home early and found Noah sitting at the dining table glaring angrily at a half-finished math worksheet. "What's the problem?" Daniel asked. "Fractions," Noah muttered dramatically. Daniel pulled out the chair beside him. "Then let's figure it out together." Noah raised one suspicious eyebrow. "You actually know this?" Daniel nearly laughed. "I run companies, Noah. I should know at least some math." That finally earned a small grin from the boy. 15 minutes later, both of them were arguing over answers like they had been doing homework together their entire lives. Across the table, Liam quietly worked on a drawing while Emily prepared dinner nearby. At one point, Liam lifted the paper toward her proudly. "Look." Emily walked over. The drawing showed the dining table with 4 people seated around it. Emily sat in the middle, the boys beside her, Daniel standing slightly behind them, exactly like life inside the mansion had slowly begun to feel. "It's beautiful," Emily told him sincerely. Liam turned toward Daniel. "Can it stay like this forever?" The question hit Daniel harder than expected. "If it depends on me," he answered quietly. "Yes." Liam seemed satisfied by the answer and returned to coloring. Friday afternoon that same week, the boys' school coordinator requested a meeting with Daniel. She explained that Noah had become more cooperative during activities, that Liam appeared calmer, more emotionally secure, more willing to engage socially. "They don't seem constantly on alert anymore," she said carefully. "It's like they finally believe someone is truly paying attention to them." Daniel listened silently and immediately knew the credit did not belong only to him. When he returned home later that evening, he went directly into the kitchen. Emily stood finishing dinner preparations. "The school coordinator talked to me today," he said. Emily looked over her shoulder. "Problem?" "No, the opposite." He waited quietly. She said the boys seemed safe now. Emily lowered her eyes briefly before continuing to stir the pan. "They needed that." Daniel stepped slightly closer. "You gave it to them." Emily shook her head gently. "I just opened the space. You were the one who needed to step into it." The truth inside that sentence stayed with Daniel for the rest of the night, because it carried a kind of care that never diminished him. It pulled him toward the version of himself he should have been long ago. The following evening, Sophia appeared at the mansion unexpectedly. Her car stopped outside shortly before dinner, while Noah and Liam sat at the table with their hands together, waiting for the prayer Emily had taught them before meals. Daniel saw the headlights through the window. His entire body immediately tightened. He reached the front door before the second ring of the bell. Sophia stood outside, perfectly composed, elegant clothing, controlled expression, calculated calm. "I came to see my sons," she said without greeting him. Daniel kept one hand against the door. "You should have called first." Sophia smiled faintly. "I don't need permission to see my children." "After disappearing for 3 years?" "Yes, you do." Her expression flickered briefly before recovering. "Are you seriously making a scene at the door?" Before Daniel could answer, Noah appeared farther down the hallway after overhearing part of the conversation. Liam emerged behind Emily moments later. Sophia entered the house carrying herself with the confidence of someone who still believed she possessed authority there. "You've both grown so much," she said toward the boys with a carefully practiced smile. Neither child moved. Daniel spoke directly. "Do you boys want to talk to her?" Noah answered immediately. "No." Sophia looked shocked. "Noah, I'm your mother." The boy held her gaze in a way painfully similar to Daniel. "Mothers don't disappear for 3 years and come back expecting everything to stay the same." Sophia inhaled more sharply before shifting attention toward Liam. "Sweetheart." Liam lowered his eyes first, then slowly looked back up. "I barely remember what it was like before." The sentence came quietly, but it made the entire room heavier. Only then did Sophia truly notice Emily standing beside the dining table, not interfering, but undeniably part of the emotional structure of the home now. "So you're the one," Sophia said coldly. "The new organizer of everyone's lives," Emily answered calmly without lowering her head. "I take care of them." Sophia tilted her head slightly. "That's a very large phrase for someone who just arrived." Before Emily could respond, Daniel stepped between them. "Enough." The room went silent. "If you want to resolve something," Daniel continued firmly, "then resolve it through the legal process you already chose." Sophia glanced around the mansion slowly like someone measuring how much territory she had lost. I'm getting my place back, Noah answered before any adult could. Places don't stay empty for 3 years. Nobody moved for several seconds afterward. Sophia realized continuing the confrontation would only damage her further. So she left with her posture still elegant outwardly, though irritation showed clearly beneath it. The moment the front door closed, Liam finally released a deep breath like he had only now allowed himself to breathe again. Noah remained rigid several seconds longer before visible exhaustion finally replaced the anger. Daniel pulled both boys close immediately. He held them tightly without speaking, long enough for their bodies to understand what words still could not fully explain. Emily quietly brought water, guided everyone gently back toward the table, then asked softly, "You boys want to continue dinner now? Or wait a little?" Noah looked toward her. "Can you do the prayer again?" Emily nodded once. The four of them sat together, Noah on one side, Liam on the other, Emily between them. Daniel several steps behind before finally pulling out his chair. The prayer itself was simple, short, but that night it carried a completely different weight because it became the first peaceful moment after the fear of losing everything had entered the house again. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Daniel found Emily in the laundry room folding clothes carefully. "She tried to provoke you too," he said quietly. Emily continued folding calmly. She was measuring space. People like that do it naturally. Daniel stepped closer. "And you?" Emily folded another shirt slowly before answering. "I know exactly where my place is." Daniel held her gaze. "And where is that?" Emily finally looked directly at him. "In the place I built, honestly. Nobody takes that away with provocation." Daniel stared at her too long. "You make difficult things sound simple." "They're not simple," Emily replied softly. "It's just easier not to get lost when you know exactly what you're protecting." And that was the exact night the feelings between them finally stopped fitting inside silence. Daniel was too emotionally exhausted to measure every word carefully anymore. But he also refused to speak impulsively. Still, when he finally spoke, the truth came out naturally. "You changed everything here." Emily stayed silent. Daniel continued, "I know you came here to work. I know there are boundaries, differences, context. I understand all of that." He exhaled slowly. "But I also know I don't walk into this house anymore without looking for you first. I hear your voice in my head before I fall asleep. I see my son smiling and immediately think about you because you created the space where that became possible." Emily did not step backward, but she did not move closer either. Daniel. It was the first time she had spoken his name without "sir" before it, and that alone changed the air between them. Daniel noticed immediately. "I'm not saying this because of the custody hearing," he continued quietly, "or because life is chaotic right now. I'm saying it because I can't keep pretending this is only admiration anymore." Emily closed her eyes briefly before reopening them. "I tried very hard not to feel anything," she admitted softly. Daniel remained silent, giving her room to continue. "Every day I reminded myself this is your house and I came here to work. I reminded myself who you are, where I came from, how easy it would be for everything to go wrong if emotions got mixed into this." Her voice lowered slightly. "But it became harder pretending after I saw you changing with the boys, after I realized your car arriving home earlier started changing my mood." Daniel stayed perfectly still, only listening. "But the boys need to come first right now," Emily whispered. Daniel nodded immediately. "Then I'll wait." Emily finally looked at him fully again. "If after the hearing you still feel this way, then we talk." "I will," Daniel answered without hesitation. Emily inhaled slowly, almost smiling despite herself, then returned to folding clothes. There was no final answer yet, but the door between them was no longer closed, and that changed everything. The week leading up to the custody hearing felt emotionally suspended. Daniel worked from home whenever possible. Noah became quieter and more protective of his younger brother. Liam drifted unpredictably between normal moments and sudden silence, and Emily adjusted the rhythm of the house constantly so nothing felt heavier than necessary. When she noticed Liam eating less, she quietly made his favorite soup without mentioning it. When Noah became more irritable, she invited him to help chop vegetables and allowed him to speak only when he felt ready. One evening, while cutting carrots beside her, Noah suddenly muttered, "If she really wanted us, she wouldn't have left." Emily did not rush to, "Oui," correct him. She simply answered honestly, "Sometimes adults make very big mistakes. What you feel about that is your right." Noah stared at the cutting board for a long moment before asking quietly, "Would you leave?" Emily immediately stopped what she was doing and looked directly into his eyes. "If I promise I'm staying," she answered softly, "then I stay." Noah nodded only once, but it clearly settled something deep inside him. 2 days later, the social worker arrived. Her name was Susan Miller. She entered the mansion calmly, though her observant eyes missed absolutely nothing. First, she spoke privately with Daniel inside the office, then separately with each boy. Afterward, she quietly examined the environment itself, the bedrooms, study areas, dinner routines, even the way people naturally occupied the living room together. Noah answered questions with more maturity than most adults expected from a 10-year-old. Liam spoke more quietly but with painful honesty. When Susan asked who usually noticed whether they had slept well before they even said anything, both boys answered immediately, Emily. When she asked who realized something was wrong before either of them spoke aloud, the answer was the same. When she asked who taught them to sit together peacefully at the table, pray before meals, and stop yelling over each other, Noah subtly pointed toward the kitchen where Emily was preparing lunch. Eventually, Susan requested a private conversation with Emily herself, and that conversation quietly became the turning point. Emily described the condition of the house when she first arrived. The boys' aggression, Daniel's emotional distance, the instability everyone had learned to survive inside. Then she explained something deeper. They didn't need more punishment, she said calmly. They needed consistency, presence, predictability. Susan kept writing notes. They spent years testing whether people would leave, Emily continued. Once they realized I wasn't disappearing after the first difficult moment, they slowly stopped fighting everything. Then when their father truly started showing up too, things changed for real. Susan listened carefully until Emily finished. Before leaving the mansion later that day, she paused briefly beside Daniel near the front entrance. What I needed to see became very clear. It was not a dramatic statement, but it was enough for Daniel to breathe easier that night. Then the hearing finally arrived. The Kanayani courthouse itself was not visually dramatic, but the emotional weight inside the building made everything feel colder and sharper. Daniel arrived early with his attorney Marcus. The boys arrived separately through proper legal arrangements. Emily was called as a witness later and remained respectfully reserved until needed. Sophia appeared elegant as always, but this time there was something tighter in her posture, less confidence. The process moved forward without theatrics. Daniel answered every question honestly. He admitted openly that for years he had been emotionally absent, that work consumed nearly all his time, that the household had lacked stability after Sophia disappeared. He did not attempt to paint himself as perfect. Instead, he spoke about what had changed, his schedule, his involvement, school routines, meals together, conversations with the boys, visible emotional presence. When Sophia testified, she spoke about regret and second chances, but problems began. Appearing the moment details entered the conversation. She did not know Noah's favorite teacher, did not know Liam slept better with a nightlight, did not know the name of Noah's closest friend, did not know how the boys usually spend Saturdays, did not even know which child preferred drawing and which one preferred card games. Every small gap said more than speeches ever could. Noah testified first. There was no hatred in his voice, and somehow that made his words even stronger. I don't want to punish my mom, he said quietly. I just want to stay where I know people will still be there when I come home. Liam spoke afterward, more nervous, but still painfully sincere. At home now. I can sleep, he whispered. I'm scared everything will change again. By the time Emily entered the room, the truth was already leaning heavily in one direction, but her calm certainty solidified it completely. She answered questions about the boys' routines, about Daniel's transformation, about small, everyday moments that revealed emotional recovery inside the house. Then one attorney asked why she had become so personally involved. Emily answered simply, children notice when they're being emotionally pushed around, and they notice when someone chooses to stay. They improved once they felt safe enough to stop preparing for abandonment. The statement was not dramatic, only precise, and it was enough. The final decision did not arrive immediately, but it arrived 2 days later. Primary custody remained with Daniel. Sophia would receive gradual supervised visitation at first, depending on consistency and emotional adjustment. There was no public humiliation, no explosive courtroom scene, no revenge, only the clear acknowledgement that relationships cannot be rebuilt through legal paperwork alone. They are rebuilt through repeated presence over time. Daniel received the call inside his home office. Marcus kept it brief. We won. The boys stay with you. Daniel closed his eyes immediately and placed one hand against the desk because suddenly his legs felt weak. Then he stood and practically ran downstairs. The boys were outside near the planter boxes with Emily, examining the first tiny signs of tomatoes beginning to grow. "You're staying with me," Daniel announced before saying anything else. Noah stood immediately. "Really? Really?" Liam started crying from relief before even moving. Noah hugged his father first. 1 second later, Liam joined them. Emily remained, standing nearby, trying unsuccessfully to hide emotion until both boys reached out and pulled her into the embrace too. That night, nobody wanted restaurants or celebrations outside the house. Noah requested roasted chicken. Liam wanted rice and orange juice. And Daniel asked Emily to prepare the table exactly like the evenings that always felt safest. So she did. The dining room glowed warmly. The food filled the table. The boys insisted Emily sit in the center like she naturally had started doing lately anyway. Daniel remained standing several steps behind for one quiet moment before finally pulling out his chair. And suddenly he saw the entire image clearly. His sons sitting peacefully together, Emily between them, warmth filling a house that once felt emotionally empty. And Daniel understood with painful clarity that this was the exact moment their lives had truly changed. Noah looked toward Emily. "You do the prayer tonight." Emily smiled softly and joined her hands. The boys did the same. Even Daniel lowered his head quietly. The prayer itself was simple. Gratitude for food, for peace, for relief, for second chances. When it ended, nobody rushed to speak immediately afterward. Then eventually came the laughter, the teasing, Noah's jokes, Liam's endless questions, and Daniel catching himself looking toward Emily far more often than he could hide. She noticed every single time. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Daniel found Emily outside near the garden, boxes studying the first green sprouts breaking through the soil. "They grew," he said softly. Emily nodded. "They grew." Several quiet seconds passed between them. Then Daniel finally spoke again without avoiding the truth anymore. "The hearing is over," he said quietly, "and I still feel exactly the same." Emily released the smallest breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "I know." Daniel turned slightly toward her. "I don't want to handle this carelessly. I don't want secrets or confusion or to place you somewhere that erases who you are. I want to build something real with you, if you want that too." Emily looked at him calmly, but this time emotion was completely visible in her eyes. "I spent a long time entering places, but I was expected to feel grateful just for being tolerated," she admitted softly. "This is the first place where I felt like my presence actually changed lives." She paused briefly. "More than one?" Daniel stepped closer. "And you're the first man who ever looked at me like a woman without forgetting the rest of who I am?" Daniel moved one step nearer. "Then stay with me." Emily smiled immediately this time. "I will." The kiss was gentle, careful, not rushed. Like both of them understood they were not starting something impulsive, only finally giving a name to something already built, slowly over time. A second later, applause interrupted them. Both boys stood at the backyard doorway, grinning. "That took forever," Noah announced dramatically. "We already knew," Liam added proudly. Emily covered her mouth, laughing in embarrassment while Daniel rubbed one hand over his face. "You were spying on us?" Noah crossed his arms. "We didn't need to spy. It was obvious." Liam ran forward and hugged Emily first, then Daniel. "Just don't move her from the middle seat at dinner," he said seriously. Noah nodded in agreement, and that was how the family finally became complete. Not dramatically, not perfectly, but honestly. Over the following months, Sophia slowly began rebuilding supervised contact with the boys. While learning there were no shortcuts back into their lives, Daniel reduced his work schedule permanently. Noah returned to drawing openly again. Liam slept peacefully without asking whether everything could disappear overnight. Emily eventually transitioned naturally away from working as house staff so their relationship could exist in a healthier place emotionally. With Daniel's encouragement, she enrolled in culinary school, something she had always dreamed about but never prioritized before. And there she discovered the same talent everyone inside the mansion had already quietly seen in her. Months later, she started organizing private dinners and small events before eventually building her own independent catering business with dignity and complete autonomy. Daniel admired that most about her, the fact that she grew beside him without depending on him. 1 year later, the dining table was full again. The boys, older, safer, talking loudly about school, dreams, and friends. Emily still sitting near the center. Daniel still pausing for 1 second before sitting beside them all. And the peace inside that room no longer came from appearances. It came from permanence, truth, and daily choice. That was how the new housekeeper proved something nobody inside that mansion had understood before. Healing a broken family was never about perfection. It was about staying, listening, caring, and choosing each other, repeatedly even after life gave every reason not to. And in the end, the millionaire, the woman who entered through the front door carrying a folded uniform, and the two boys who had stopped believing in people discovered together that the greatest wealth inside that mansion had never been money. It was the family that finally learned how to sit at the same table, give thanks for what they had, and remain.